Good evening, everyone. Thanks everyone for being here on the call tonight. I'd like to thank our speakers, Roshan Panjwani, Skari Wawatu, Shaki Binta, and Dana Al Hassan for being here with us tonight for this discussion. So I'm sure everyone, of course, is aware of the conflict in Ukraine right now. It's been unfolding over the past month, and the purpose of this forum tonight to discuss the role of the US and NATO in provoking and prolonging this conflict and to counter the barrage, the constant propaganda, media propaganda, and everywhere propaganda that's covering up NATO's role and the US's role in this conflict or ignoring it, demonizing the leadership of Russia and China, justifying destruction of the Russian economy through sanctions, and calling for vast increases in military budgets, both in the United States and Europe, and NATO allies, and while cutting social spending here at home. We're here to provide a space to sort of discuss this sort of critical part of the discussion that has just been completely ignored, washed over, in the West or worldwide, really. So I think, I'm going to send it to our first speaker, Roshan Panjwani. And let me I'll read a little introduction and hand it over to you, Roshan. Roshan Panjwani is a member of Workers' World Party and a Muslim American immigrant, North Carolinian, and a longtime organizer. Roshan was first radicalized by the implementation of the Patriot Act and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and hopes to sharpen their anti-imperialist analysis alongside comrades dedicated to building a more just world. Go ahead, Roshan.
Wow, Phil, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's a joke to Phil because I wrote that. Well, hi to everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'd like to think, and I hope we all do share like a gut instinct to have a healthy sense of skepticism where the US and its military allies are, getting ready for war. If you've lived through any US conflict, you begin to see these patterns emerge. When imperialist forces unite, workers rarely stand to gain. Just about a month ago, public opinion polls showed that most people in the US were opposed to any direct involvement in a war in Ukraine. Since then, like Phil said, there has been a media onslaught of near 24/7 coverage regarding Russia's military intervention in Ukraine. The same media that didn't bother to create any sense of similar public outrage or objection to the US's military interventions in Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Venezuela, Iran, or Cuba. So what's going on, really? I wanted to address my remarks today on the role of NATO in this conflict and how the best route for any anti-imperialist is to aim for revolutionary defeatism. It's probably a phrase that you've heard of before, but if you're new to it like me, that's a phrase that means rooting for the defeat of one's own government in an imperialist war. Because if we care about the people in Ukraine who have been put in harm's way, it's urgent that we demand an end to NATO escalation of this conflict. The Biden administration recently approved an emergency spending package of a little bit over $13 billion in aid to Ukraine. As someone who directly benefits from Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as food stamps, I know it will be low-income workers like me who will feel the pinch of this cut to social programs. But it's not about pitting the working class here against the working class of the world. The worst part of it is that none of this funding will actually help the people of Ukraine. While Ukraine is not an official member of the NATO military alliance, the US has been spending billions of dollars to send lethal arms and mercenaries into the country for about 8 years, with US trained and equipped forces shelling the border between Ukraine and Russia up for about that same length of time. In 2014, a US-backed fascist coup reduced Ukraine to the poorest country in Europe. So let's think about that. This is a country flooded with NATO weapons, but it doesn't have basic social services, lowest rate of vaccination, poorest country in Europe. So it doesn't mean that the US sending funds there indicates that's going to help the well-being of the people there. There's every indication that the US just sees Ukraine as a pawn in a larger strategy against Russia. That brings us another opportunity to zoom out, haha, with clearer eyes to see what this situation is really about. Since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, global capitalists have been really eager to usurp what they see as the vast natural resources available in Russia. At a time of dire capitalist economic crisis, these resources appear to the imperialists as the solution to all their problems. It's no surprise that people are seeing, a lot of mass mandates are ending and nobody wants to talk about how we actually need another dose of the vaccine. Oh, COVID's over. Let's all focus on this, right? It's kind of like this manufactured distraction. There is a real danger in seeing this conflict as a moral challenge between the personalities of opposing political leaders, whether that's Putin versus Zelensky or even Putin versus Biden, challenging the real claim that Ukrainian Nazi militias are part of this with the answer that, oh, actually, that can't be true because President Zelensky is Jewish, is not unlike claiming that because Barack Obama was the US president, oh, there can't possibly be any anti-Blackness in the US, right? The US press secretary, I think her name is Jen Psaki, she recently invited a group of, I'd say like moderate left, liberal leaning TikTokers that have pretty good follower count to discuss how to keep their messaging consistent on social media. There's a real desire to maintain the narrative, and we need to be on the lookout for that. The US has been particularly opaque about its military biological weapons program. People are calling this in the coverage bio labs, so that's like what they mean, that are being carried out in Ukraine and funded by the Department of Defense, which means that as anti-imperialists, we need to really seriously be on the lookout for any indication of a false flag operation. Pretty standard in the NATO playbook, a false flag operation is a technique where either US, EU, or NATO backed alliance carry out a violent attack on innocent civilians and use that as a justification to invade who they see as their enemy. It's difficult when any attempt to point this out or really point out a hole in any Western narrative, you get criticized as a Putin puppet or a Russian asset. I don't think that workers in the US are really swayed by this idea of these personalities and people are making memes out of oh, this leader is so attractive and things like that. It really shows how desensitized we are to war, right? That everything is just a story to us. I think it's important as leftists, as people concerned about this conflict and people concerned about the welfare of the people in harm's way, to point out that US involvement, it's not just that it doesn't help the people in Ukraine, it actually actively harms them and does nothing to increase their quality of life. So I think that if the US imperialists are doing something to increase their power that directly harms the people in Ukraine and directly harms working class people at home, then I think we are within our right to really be critical of this narrative. I'm really looking forward to hearing what other folks have to say, and I'll be available in the Q&A afterwards. Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you, Roshan. Our next speaker is Askari Wawatu, a member of Mapinduzi.
So what's good, y'all? Comrade, they were spot on with it. Just, some things that I've seen with this conflict or war, this really has been taking place since 2014, with the coup and with the bombardment of the, Donbass regions of Ukraine. It's been going widely unnoticed since it first started because, when the bombs was being dropped on behalf of NATO and the US, they don't want people to talk about it. It's only when big bad Russia comes into play, that's when we hear all of these, talks about sanctions and NATO needs to intervene and things of that nature. And it goes to it ignores some of the wants and desires of the people. Something that I've kind of keyed in my analysis of this whole situation is how a lot of the separatist groups and a lot of the people of the majority affected areas such as Donbass, they align themselves as ethnically Russian. A good portion of the people, they speak Russian. They've also, have said that they wanted, at least to, be have some type of like Russian security there to protect them and things of that nature. And even outside of just the cultural aspect of it, I had a class and I was learning about like Donbass, and I learned how it was like one of the most mineral rich regions of Ukraine. And so that goes into play. That shows you like it's really a war of imperialism. Of course, NATO is going to want to expand. The U.S. is going to want to expand and control Ukraine, make sure that it stays as one Ukraine because there's imperial interest there. I think we should always look and see what the economic implications of these situations are. And even on top of that, it's just blatant hypocrisy on behalf of the U.S. because if we take a comparative approach to this thing, we see how the U.S. is arming, the Saudi Arabia, they've been arming their campaign against Yemen, or how they arm the Israelis against Palestinians, or even how they, even on the map of Africa with Morocco and Western Sahara, they went ahead and just funded it and turned the blind eye. We really funded it and allowed Morocco to kind of occupy Western Sahara. So the U.S. has no moral authority when it comes to intervening anywhere, really, for that matter, but especially not in terms of this whole thing with Ukraine and Russia. The U.S. has incited this violence. The U.S. has perpetuated it. It sent troops to Eastern Europe for years now. They've been ramping up. They've been funding NATO. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all I got right now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I think, hypocrisy, that's the word that's been on my mind this whole time as well. It's just been so, even for, the United States, just blatant, so blatant throughout all of this. But sorry, I don't mean to editorialize too much. Our third speaker here is Shaki Binta from Black Workers for Justice. Shaki Binta is a retired union organizer and labor activist for more than 30 years, as well as a lifelong organizer in the Black liberation movement. An important focus of her work has also been the struggle against women's oppression and its importance for national liberation and social transformation. She's a member of Black Workers for Justice, currently serving as a coordinator of the BWFJ Black Liberation Working Group, and also currently serves as a national organizer for the National Black Liberation Movement National Unity Initiative. Shaki.
Thank you very much. Greetings, everybody. Really appreciate being here as a part of this discussion. I wanted to make maybe 5 quick points about the Ukraine situation for consideration. But, I agree fully with what's already been said so far. So needless to say that. But, the situation in Ukraine is a pretty complex one. And, it could be, confusing for the masses of people beyond, just our, those of us who are, in revolutionary formations or who are activists on the left. But, to the masses of our people, for example, in the Black community, they see a Black defense secretary, they see a Black UN ambassador and a Black vice president, all supporting this Ukraine war with the idea that, well, perhaps this is morally correct because no country should invade another. And, you hear that commonly, but the complexities of the situation there also lend toward, nuanced variations of political views, within the left itself on this question. And so, a lot of so-called left forces are condemning Russia and wanting to highlight or specify this invasion, as being something that we should all condemn. And certainly we're not in favor of any country invading another. But, the situation here, I think we have to look a little bit more deeply, at what's going on, as one of the speakers already said. For one thing, um, you know, you got capitalist forces who have emerged in Russia and who also exist in the Ukraine, as well as U.S. capitalist interests in this region that are all, underlying factors driving some of the conflict that's developed at this point. So, that's something that we have to keep in mind, and it certainly, makes the situation more complex for the left, feeling like some people feeling like, well, this is a capitalist country now, and they have no reason to invade. So, that's one factor that's out there. As other speakers have said, U.S. capital has played a real role inside of Ukraine, as they've done with other countries all over the world, manipulating the internal politics. And everybody's given the example of the 2014 coup, where the U.S. has spent billions of dollars before this conflict even developed, trying to, force regime change or manipulate regime change so that they have a favorable, um, allied force running the governments that facilitates the interest of all these capitalist forces, particularly those in Ukraine and the U.S., who's trying to, dominate there. So, the struggle over the natural resources and things that are available in that region is certainly a part of, what we're looking at. Then the question of NATO expansion, has a direct impact on what has occurred here. And I don't find any, it's by far, there's no unity across the world in favor of sanctions against Russia or of the expansion of NATO, which the U.S. has been involved in doing now for decades, uh, especially since the fall of the USSR. But, again, manipulating all of these countries that border on Russia, from Central Asia all the way through Eastern Europe, including the Ukraine. This is a factor that it is driving and dealing with whether or not security for Russia is a legitimate concern of the Russian people in terms of dealing with the conditions, that they're faced with. And so this is, a key factor. And I think, just the public discourse before the war started revealed that Russia had been reaching out, trying to negotiate with both Ukraine and the U.S. to negate the expansion of NATO, to stop the expansion, to stop the encirclement of Russia, with the interests of capital in mind, and, trying to pull more and more forces, out of Russia, to underdevelop the country even more since the fall of the USSR. So there was a refusal to negotiate on these questions by the West, and the legitimate concerns that Russia has for its security, has been ignored. Next, I'll just mention the point that U.S. capital has had no trouble locating billions of dollars in military aid. Uh, some say 13 billion. I've seen figures as high as over 16 billion in military spending that's gone into this support for the Ukraine war and to encourage this kind of expansion of NATO. So, the kind of money that they're spending uh, has a direct impact on, what's going on here in this country, as we've seen recently with this so-called, Biden Build Back Better, and the human infrastructure part of it, was voted down by Congress, unable to move forward. Yet, and one of the reasons was, it's just too expensive. It's going to cost billions of dollars. Yet they have immediately come up with billions that they were already investing in Ukraine and other parts of the world, to support this struggle militarily inside Ukraine. So, I think this is an important factor. So for the Black community, I think, and for all oppressed national communities, and for, the working class in general, the same forces that are making these policies for the expansion of Ukraine and in the interest of capital throughout Eastern Europe and other places, these are the same ones that are voting, to ignore the human needs here and to prevent, the investment of billions of dollars into, human needs that, are, very much needed to be addressed here. So finally, I'll say that, it's important that, we be clear that even though, we're not promoting the question of, of um, invasion into other countries, but we do know that there are just and unjust wars that take place, and that there's such thing as imperialist domination and oppression, and then resistance, national liberation, and movements, to throw off, the impact that U.S. capital has had. So when our main thrust as the left is to, highlight the main question being Russia's invasion of Ukraine, then it kind of supports then U.S. imperialist interests and strengthens U.S. imperialism, even though may not be the intention that people are speaking of, but that's what will happen if our emphasis, goes to just the condemnation of Russia for invading. So we have to see the U.S. as the main danger, U.S. imperialism as the main danger throughout the world, the strongest force, and the role that it has played in sparking, this conflict in the first place. So, I think that struggle needs to take place in the left. We need to be clear about that. And, for us, on the left, condemning U.S. imperialism may be an easy thing, but it may be confusing among the masses of people if we don't explain it, and why we should oppose the U.S. doing that, because U.S. imperialism role in this whole thing. So we ought to be calling for certainly to eliminate the expansion of NATO, but to dismantle NATO altogether. That should be the call, that we should, educate people about that in our communities. And that should be the call on the left, to dismantle NATO. And I think we should call for them to rescind these billions of dollars they have now shifted into the Ukraine war, and have those monies returned and made available immediately to be reallocated toward the needs of people here in the U.S. The child care question, minimum income question, health care, elimination of student loan debt, and et cetera. So, these are some of the needs that we have. So that, I'll just conclude with that. But, I think these are some of the kind of things that, need to be considered in looking at the Ukrainian situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaki. I think, the big question throughout, this sort of war in the Ukraine has been, or it's gone unasked, I think, is, why does NATO still exist? NATO was created at the close of World War II, a military alliance by the United States to counter the Soviet Union. Well, the Soviet Union's been gone for 30 years, and not only does NATO still exist, but it's doubled in size. It keeps getting bigger and bigger and moving closer and closer to Russia. But this question goes completely, unasked. Anyway, our final speaker here is Dana Al-Hassan, and let me pull up your bio. Dana is an anti-imperialist, and Dana from Party for Socialism and Liberation. Dana is an anti-imperialist Palestinian organizer, member of Party for Socialism and Liberation, and Muslims for Social Justice. Dana works to connect the Palestinian struggle for liberation to the Black struggle here in the United States, particularly in the South. She's worked with community members and jailhouse lawyers, speak liaisons to uplift demands of people incarcerated in the United States, and works to bring attention to the conditions of people incarcerated here and in Palestine, specifically highlighting the conditions of Palestinian women political prisoners, conditions of Palestinian women prisoners. Dana?
Hi all, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for everyone who's watching the webinar, and thanks to Workers World for inviting me to take part in this important conversation. And so I want to discuss the role of racism in the US media coverage of Ukraine and compare that to the media coverage of US supported bombing campaigns globally, such as in Palestine, and as well as locally here in the US. And so I want you all to ask yourself, what language is being used by the media and why? What is this language doing? What is it shifting people's attention away from and shifting attention to? Because we must place the context of the mainstream media coverage in the larger context of US imperialism and NATO expansion, as the other panelists have done. And so, Matatas agrees as well, my cat. And so you may have all heard of mainstream media coverage of Ukraine. In efforts to garner support for US war and for NATO expansion, the media has used racist rhetoric to gain sympathy for Ukraine. We heard a BBC News journalist discuss how Ukrainians are European people with blue eyes and blonde hair. And we heard from NBC News, Charles de Gazza say, this is a relatively civilized, relatively European city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen. This isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan that has seen conflict raging for decades. And another NBC correspondent, Kelly Kobela, said, just to put it bluntly, these are not refugees from Syria. These are refugees from neighboring Ukraine that, quite frankly, is part of it. These are Christians, they're white, they're very similar people. We've even seen racist rhetoric globally as well, like on France's BFM TV. There's a journalist, Philippe Corbet, saying, we're talking about Europeans living in cars that look like ours to save their lives. And so as a Palestinian, this is extremely infuriating to hear these correspondents and journalists with their racist rhetoric while hardly ever reporting on other parts of the world, on the Black and brown parts of the world. And if they ever do report on us, if they ever do report on Palestine, then it's usually to negatively depict Palestinians as extremists, as terrorists, as violent, when in reality, we're defending ourselves, our homes, and our land. We're fighting against a settler colonial enterprise that is backed by the US and its allies. In fact, Palestinians to this day make up the largest refugee population in the world. There are over 12 refugee camps in Lebanon where Palestinian families have been forced to flee their homes since 1948 and have not been able to return since that day. I'm also from a family of refugees, and I've never been able to go back to Palestine or even to visit, because Israel denies Palestinian refugees the right to return to our lands. Yet the US media does not cover this. In fact, an image of Palestinian fighter Ahad Tamimi from 2012, from 10 years ago, was wrongfully used by US media to garner support for more war by tugging at the heartstrings to sympathize with Ukraine. We also hardly ever hear about Yemen in the meanwhile, in the media, excuse me. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, along with 9 other nations and backed by the US, has been leading a massive military bombing campaign in Yemen. We've heard accounts of prisons and funeral processions being bombed, with over 150,000 Yemenis being killed. Tens of thousands have also been killed through sanctions and hunger. And sanctions are, in fact, a form of war, economic warfare to be exact. And in 2022 alone, there have been an estimated 23,000 Yemeni civilians displaced in what is referred to as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Yet you do not see any sympathy from the media. The US also bombed Somalia, again, on February 28, just 1 month ago. And yet again, we did not hear sympathy from the media and very little reporting, if any. And this comes after 1 year when the US claimed to pull AFRICOM out of Somalia. AFRICOM is short for the US Africa Command, and this is an extension of NATO in order to protect the free flow of resources to the global market from countries in Africa. Media correspondents also hardly covered the reality of Africans in Ukraine who are trying to seek refuge and get to safety. Moroccans and other Africans would recount how they were not allowed to board the train. And when they were let in, they were forced to pay. One student from Ghana reported how the first people who were able to seek safety were the white people, and then Indians, and then Arabs, and then Black people were last. Sorry, Batata. And you know, this also reminds me how the media portrays Black people here in the US. Often we see the media portray Black revolutionary fighters as looters, as rioters, as violent. And all throughout US history, the US has bombed and attacked the working class. One of many examples is the attack and the bombing of the MOVE organization. The MOVE organization was founded in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1972 by John Africa. The MOVE organization spoke about racial and environmental injustice on street corners and protests in front of numerous organizations throughout the city of Philadelphia. Over the years, MOVE members were attacked, arrested, jailed, and killed by cops, while no officer was ever charged with a crime. On May 13, 1985, SWAT teams dropped C4 bombs on the rooftop of the home of MOVE members, killing 11 members and destroying 65 neighborhoods. So these are the stories that we must share, how struggles of the working class Americans fought for racial and economic justice, for an 8-hour workday, for the end of child labor, job safety, and so much more. And this is why when we watch this racist coverage of Ukraine, we must apply the context of US imperialism. We must remember discussion provided by the other panelists about how the US did not negotiate, how the US broke its promises, how US continues to expand NATO, and even how the US placing missiles 3 to 6 minute flying time from Russia is a threat to Russia. So when I see fellow Palestinians make comparisons of Ukrainians to be called self-defense and have a right to resist under international law, we must acknowledge this double standard in the larger context of imperialism, which then means that we must also call for no to US war with Russia. And without a doubt, it goes without saying, war impacts the people the most, including Ukrainians. And of course, we extend our utmost solidarity to the working class of Ukrainians and to the oppressed people of the world. And we can do that in the US by saying no to war, saying no to US war with Russia, saying no to US military support to Ukraine, and opposing a no-fly zone. And it's extremely important that we continue these conversations and we continue to build an anti-war movement and bring our tax dollars home and invest in our communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. I think for now, sorry, I see the chat and I get distracted. We're going to go into a question and answer portion. So if folks have any questions for the panelists, if you could put them in the chat, and then we can read them. I'm not seeing any right now, so I think I'll just put one question out there because it's been mentioned by a few of the panelists. So, you know, in response to the war in the Ukraine, there have been massive sanctions taken out against Russia by the United States and by many other countries. And many in the sort of anti-war peace movement, even some on the left, you know, talk about sanctions as an alternative to war. I think it was addressed a little bit, but I'd be curious to hear more panelists' thoughts on that.
Well, I'll just briefly say, like, I personally think that when oppressed people like in Palestine call for BDS, then I think that those are kind of sanctions that we can ask for, because that means that the people most affected are asking like a direct ask. When an imperialist nation levies a sanction, it is a form of warfare, just like it is a form of warfare to let Black maternal health in this country be not taken care of and let, you know, Black women die in labor. You know, that isn't necessarily using a weapon, but it is, you know, literally murdering and part of a genocide of a community, right? And I think that that's more like broadly speaking about sanctions, right? I also think that in this situation, it's interesting because these sanctions are also going to negatively affect the people in the US as well as the working class in Russia. So it's like, obviously, like we should oppose them, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is a Shaki.
Oh.
Go ahead, sister.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to talk more about sanctions being a form of warfare, because sanctions deprive people of basic needs. One of my friends in Syria, from Halab, from Aleppo, Syria, her dad had a form of Parkinson's disease that was treatable and curable, but he was not able to get basic medicine that he needed for his disease because of sanctions, and he actually passed away. Sanctions, if we look at Iran during COVID. Iran is extremely advanced in technology and science, but you had so many people who died from COVID because such important medicine and tools that were needed to bolster the infrastructure were not be able to let in because of sanctions. I don't know if you all watch Breakthrough News, where you have Rania Khalek, who's based in Lebanon, and sometimes just halfway through, she's recording, you know, her generator has to come on because the electricity goes out because of sanctions. But of course, and so this is what sanctions means, that you're depriving the people of basic things, of basic medicine. And to speak more on Roshan's point that they brought up about, I guess, anti-imperialist sanctions, you know, as Palestinians, we call placing sanctions on Israel. But this doesn't mean that you're going to deprive the people of medicine. This means, first and foremost, an arms embargo, right? And so that way you're directly targeting the actual Israeli government, which I guess pun intended, because sometimes we hear oftentimes in the media talking about targeted sanctions, but those are the exact same. Those sanctions hurt the people. So it's really important for us to distinguish between sanctions being that hurt the working class and press people versus anti-imperialist sanctions, and to really understand how sanctions are used as a tool in order to hurt the people. Just like I talked about before, as Yemen, tens of thousands of Yemenis have been killed through direct bombing, but also indirectly through sanctions.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with the two panels before. I think sanctions should be opposed. And they really, even though supposedly they're targeting the quote unquote oligarchs of Russia or whatever, but really it's the people, the working class and the poor of all of the countries impacted that, you know, receive the brunt of, you know, the sanctions and the impact that the sanctions have. And so I think they should be opposed and rescinded immediately. And we should be demanding that. So it's not only these you know, capitalist warmongers who suffer. In fact, they don't suffer, but those of us, our communities, the working class and the poor, you know, those communities suffer. So you know, sanctions are no, we should be opposing them and calling for them to end immediately.
Yeah, I unite with everybody. Just like something real quick, I just want to throw out there. The way I look at sanctions is sanctions are like coups, but that's what sanctions are to me. Like they're coups, except you don't have somebody like directly kicking in your door. I mean, it might lead to that, but we all know the U.S. uses sanctions for regime change. It does absolutely nothing for the people. It perpetuates war and violence against the people like that. So yeah, I mean that's it.
Phil, do you mind if I take a question that came in the chat?
I was going to read the chat one, so yeah.
Oh, great, perfect.
Yeah, there was also one that I think some of them don't show up in the chat. Anyway, there have been a couple questions that I think, and if I get you the thrust of your question wrong, feel free to put that in the chat too. But people asking how this conflict is going to change sort of the balance of power globally, right, between imperialism and the global South, or between imperialism in China, Russia, and also sort of the economic shift that's occurring as, you know, with the sanctions and certain economies being forced out of using the dollar. The sort of, I'm not an economist, so I'm trying to wrap my head around this, but not being part of the sort of U.S. imperialist dominated global, you know, monetary system. So I was going to ask if folks had thoughts about that. Does that make sense? Does the question make sense?
I can get it. Yeah, I just think with this conflict is really like what we're seeing is I think a push towards a multipolar world. You feel me? I think like the US is definitely, they're trying to, everything the US is doing and leading with the media campaign and all this types of things they're doing these things because they understand that they're losing hegemony on the world stage. They understand that like they actually got some contenders that's like gonna go toe to toe with them. And I think like, I'm not saying we should be pro Putin or nothing like that, but what I am saying is I think our best interest is to have a multipolar world. You feel what I'm saying? Because like we've been subjugated under U.S. empire for so long. Like it's been the U.S. It's been NATO. That's what it's been. We do need we need other states, like other countries like that can actually say no, basically to stand up and say no to NATO expansion, like no to like these predatory loans from the IMF and all of these things. We need that. I think anyway.
Think in terms of changing the some of the questions we're saying, like changing Russia's position in the world or the balance of power. Yeah, like Ascari was saying, like there's a real risk that we could have a I guess like puppet leader installed in Russia, right? Like a NATO backed person. There are, especially with the like really intense personalized attacks about like Putin this, Putin that, like really making him seem like, he's so beyond the pale. I've heard workers like are usually very like-minded in politics with me will say like, well, we just need to take him out, we just need to like have a hit on him or something like that. And it's like, whatever you think about this leader who was elected by people, like that means that there's a real risk that there will be a US regime, be a US backed regime change. And if you look at an example like Afghanistan, when we backed the leadership that came in, that didn't do anything in the long run that was beneficial to the people, like of that country. So I do think that's a real risk. I think that changing Russia's position in the world, I think that people in the US don't really understand Russia's position in the world. And I'll put myself in that too. Sometimes I think that there's there's like this thing that they're the old world, that they wish they were the superpower or something like that, without recognizing that this is one of the largest landmass countries, right? That the ability to profit off of the resources available, oil, but also like precious metals and things like that. And also Russia serving as an ally to folks in China government, like Russia plays a unique role, towards a more multipolar, like Astari was saying. And I hope that answered some questions.
I could speak a little bit to some of the things I've heard. There is a danger of this war, backing itself into some kind of nuclear confrontation. I don't think that should be just taken for granted as if it can't possibly happen, because it possibly can happen. So that's one thing. But in terms of, balance of power and balance of forces, I think that is a good question to keep an eye on in terms of, if Russia is driven out, humiliated, and NATO prevails, what's going to happen. There's already a lot of struggles and tensions going on around the world because of, U.S. domination, U.S. imperialism's role in so many things that impact so many countries and poor people all over the world. So, there is a danger there. And that's another reason why it's so important to, rather than focus on, uh, the critique of Russia, that we condemn U.S. imperialism and place the brunt of our fight there, in this period, and push for all of the forces involved in this conflict, at least Ukraine and Russia, to go back to the negotiating table and try to solve this conflict. And so, yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I think the focus on condemning Russia, I think, just strengthens U.S. imperialism, and that's the error. Something has to be primary, in this situation, in my thinking. The other thing that I would mention that I think is important for all of us activists to do as we're talking about this issue in our communities, to teach people that, the propaganda that they're seeing, not that people don't know there's propaganda, but when you have a war situation, the propaganda is important. It's a part of the military arsenal to control the conflict. And so a lot of what we're seeing here in the US, with the, children, the hospital having, children written outside of it, but it was still bombed and all these things, or these false flag operations that the sister mentioned earlier. These are things that go on in the US anyway. The US media is very distorted and biased and serves the interests of capital. Uh, but it's even, worse. The distortions are even worse when it comes to this conflict in US interests. So, we have to, say to people that we're not being shown or told the whole story. For example, there's been no news coverage of all of the African nations that have refused to support sanctions against Russia in the history of that. Who's reported on that in the news? We haven't heard a word about it, but yet that's significant. And there are other parts of the world who've taken that same position. And people don't know, they've just, people here in this country, the miseducation we're all well aware of, but the political backwardness of, uh, just knee-jerk reaction every time you hear the word Russia, the same way that, every time you hear the word Cuba or Castro, it was like they're depicted as monsters and, this kind of thing. And so we have to challenge those notions in our communities and re-educate forces around these type of questions that we're not getting the whole story. We're not being told what really is going on in the world and, what the real balance of forces are in any given particular situation. And that's another discussion that we should be having, that be doubtful, be skeptical. You're not hearing the truth. And because this is a war, you're getting, propaganda geared toward, victory for the Ukrainians and, lies and distortions and falsehoods and, and rumors and all this stuff. So I'll stop there. I got a few other thoughts, but I don't want to just keep going on and on.
No, this is a great discussion. And I think since we're getting near 8 o'clock, maybe a good place to stop would be, I think I'd like to hear more about this propaganda piece of it that you were mentioning. And because we've seen in the media this overwhelming avalanche of propaganda and in places you wouldn't even expect, like the International Cat Association kicking out Russians or something. Like it's ridiculous, right? But and then we see like the building up of like Zelensky as this hero figure and the demonization of Putin and even Chinese leadership and all of that. And I think I guess the question is, what can be done to sort of counter this propaganda? And you touched on this a little bit, Ashaki, but I'd like to hear if folks have thoughts, ways to sort of push back against this and to educate people, especially the working class, around these issues.
I think to combat it, we really got to meet people where they are. Like, as much as we, we criticize the TikTokers and things like that going up to, meet with the press secretary, like there's people on TikTok, like they're on there. Like, let's be real. Like we gotta create our own propaganda, digital, physical copies. We really gotta like educate the masses and call out the contradictions as they are. You feel me? We really gotta like draw parallels to certain situations. Like ask people like, why does the US and EU and NATO, all them, why do they demonize Hamas but uplift the what was it, the Azov battalion? Well, it's filled with neo-Nazis. Like why do they demonize one and not the other? Or why do they demonize Eritrea in the Horn of Africa and call it the North Korea of Africa when they've not taken any IMF loans, if I'm not mistaken? They ain't did none of that. We got to really draw them connections. Is it like these countries and these people, these groups, are they really bad and evil? or are they just opposed to U.S. imperialism, and are they just opposed to being dominated and, you know, colonized and just subjugated by somebody else? Like, we got to really draw them connections and bring it to the people. Because, like, you know, like, let's be real, like some of the comrades highlighted it earlier, people was already skeptical of this situation before. But like U.S. media, U.S. propaganda is so strong, like they just beating it up. Like we see it every day, just beating it up, beating it up, beating it up, beating it up. So it's like we got to do something. Like we got to combat that and keep on just going and strong, because the U.S. propaganda machine not gonna stop at the end of the day. It's just not.
That's right. You know, one thing I saw that I thought was a good example for people, and the example was, you know, what if Russia had uh, come over to Canada and amassed all kinds of military, material at the border between Canada and the U.S. And they're just lining up across, thousands of miles of the U.S. northern border, with military weapons. I mean, the U.S. would find that a provocation. So, we need to understand this in terms of, how Russia sees it, given its history that, of course, people here in this country don't know because, you're not really taught the truth about world history, in our school systems here. But, and just looking back at even the 1960s when the Soviet Union did amass equipment in Cuba, this almost brought us to World War III, nuclear war and all of this stuff. Because this small island had a couple of had some arsenals there from the Soviet Union. So, and this was a provocation to the United States, and they jumped through. But this now can't be allowed because it's Russia, that has a history of being invaded, with U.S. participation in that, with the undermining of the Soviet Union as a principal question, and it's never discussed that the U.S. deploys these secret armies. I'm not talking about the public ones, and these volunteers. I'm talking about, the secret armies that are sent into these countries, to help this conflict. And that's going on right now. And we should know that, where the U.S. is supposedly out of it, not in it. We're not going to send troops in. They're already in, so helping, as best they can with this conflict. So, those are just, I mean, these are the type of things that to me, we need to draw out and help examine and, and listen and learn from how the masses perceive these things and talk about them. So let me stop there, but.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be brief. I know we're coming up at 8 and I absolutely agree with everything you both said, just about the idea of meeting people where they're at and really taking the time and having conversations with people and developing our own materials, our own, whether it's digital or in person. As just one example is with PSL, we have created a no-fly zone brochure, like why we should oppose a no-fly zone. Because the terminology of a no-fly zone, sometimes people can be like, oh, that sounds like a good thing. Like, yes, we should support this. When in reality, what a no-fly zone means is actually shooting down Russian planes. That means like you have more direct confrontations between two nuclear powers. And so that is just another way that we can engage with the public and really begin to debunk a lot of this propaganda. Because as Ashkari said, like the US propaganda war machine's not going to stop. So we have to really amp up our knowledge and our tools in order to meet with people where they're at and really have important and engaging conversations with folks.
I see another interesting question in the chat, just to close out running my mouth here. But why do we think some regular Americans have reacted the way they have to this conflict? And the base of it is the miseducation. This country is depoliticized. People have no notion of what's really going on in the world, and they look at everything through the standpoint that serves the interests of U.S. capital, and there's a knee-jerk reaction to it. But also the propaganda is pretty intense, that they're putting on, and so people are reacting because they've been trained to see Russia as our enemy and communism as the great boogeyman is going to destroy all of the world, and all of this stuff that they've done throughout the last 100 years of trying to undermine the resistance to domination by U.S. imperialism and these Western capitalist imperialist nation. So I think that's why people are, some people respond the way they do. It's been training, orientation, propaganda, and confusion. And it's even happening in the left with regard to this question. So, it can be difficult. These are complex questions, not simple ones, not just black and white. But, if we're materialists, then we know that there are contradictions, and at times there's something that's primary. And what is the primary contradiction here? And that should lead us back to the U.S. imperialist state.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. I just want to say, like, not only have I really enjoyed all of your talks, I'm also learning from them. And I think that more opportunities that we can get to, like, talk like this, speak freely, work with the folks who have attended and have the conversations like what's winning. And I don't mean like winning as in like let's win a war, but more like what's gonna be effective when we're talking to the communities that we're a part of and engaged in. And I think to answer the question about propaganda, that's such as my last remark, will be about how it really gets to the crumbling origin myth of the US. So I say origin myth, people think about Batman, they think about Marvel characters of like the spider who bit Spider-Man, right? A lot of people for many, many decades have thought that the origin myth of the US is that we were very like, we don't want to be in part of World War II. But then, we had a change of heart and decided to get involved, and we helped win the war against the Nazis, right? A lot of people, even people who are anti-imperialists, for a long time kind of assumed that whether the US was right or wrong, that they were the daddy good cop of the world, like, hey, now everybody calm down, father is here to say don't do that now. And it's interesting because in the last, like, I guess 5-7 years, like, more and more people in the US do not buy into that anymore, are not buying into this American exceptionalism narrative that we are a force for good in the world. And I think that that is creating a real sense of crisis in the US, like a real panic feeling for imperialist forces, for the government, for a lot of people. I mean, people are saying like the breaking down of institutions. People don't believe in, people don't want to go to school anymore. People don't want to do work anymore. People are always complaining like that. Like, what is that about? That's not just about COVID. It's about like, there is a sense of recognizing that this is not like how we should be treated. And, I said earlier that I was radicalized around the time of like the Afghanistan war. Well, I remember being a young feminist at the time, and people would say like, well, women's rights might be bad here, but at least it's not like in Afghanistan, right? And that narrative, that at least, has been enough for a lot of people, and it's kind of crumbled the anti-war left. I think that since the Iraq war, the anti-war left has not been as strong or as vocal because of this like moral fiction that we get into. I think that falls into the personalities, and I think that these are like really desperate attempts to regain that narrative of like, no, we are good. This is a good country. Spend your money here. This is like, we're the good superpower. And at the heart of the fiction of that narrative is the Soviet Union, right? Because the role that the Soviet Union played in defeating the Nazis, right? The role that like when this fall of the Soviet Union reduced like life expectancy in Russia, like the Soviet Union and its own way of its narrative in Afghanistan, right? Like this narrative has been so important to the people of the US that Russia pokes a big hole in it. And that's why people are really wanting to fight back. And I mean people in power. And then when you say like regular people, I think of myself as a regular person, as well. But like, working class people like ourselves, like it's familiar. Like anti-Russian sentiment from the Cold War is familiar to people. People feel like it's fine to make fun of, it doesn't feel good to like fake a Iraqi accent, right? but you hear people doing fake Russian accents all the time. The xenophobia is just so familiar to people from the Cold War.
I hate to jump in and kind of cut things off. This has been such a great discussion, but it's getting late, and I think we're going to have to, unfortunately for now, start wrapping it up. But I think it just goes to show there's so much more to be said, and we should definitely continue these discussions. I think if the speakers have any brief closing remarks for a minute or two, maybe we'll just go through reverse order the way we started. So if there's work people want to highlight, or just some very brief closing remarks, and then I think we're gonna wrap it up. Donna, anything you'd like to say?
Sure, I'll be brief, but just to reiterate the points about really taking the time to debunk propaganda and to really study what's going on and pay attention to the language and always place things in the context of US imperialism is really important, because we have to continue to build a really strong anti-war movement and saying no to US war with Russia, no to military support to Ukraine, oppose the no-fly zone, and say no to sanctions. These are really important demands that we have to keep demanding, and we have our power in numbers. We can actually achieve this. We can work together to achieve this. And then I also do want to just plug in for some of our upcoming activities. If anyone is interested in learning more about Palestine and you are around the Durham area, Duke SJP, Duke Students for Justice in Palestine, are hosting a series of events next week. There's a Palestine 101 on Tuesday, in which I will be teaching. So if you want to learn more about Palestine, I encourage you to come to that. And there is also the week after, as part of PSL, we are hosting a political forum to talk about the abortion struggle and defending reproductive rights, particularly what are the issues that women and non-binary people are facing here in the Carolinas. And I know there's a bunch of other upcoming events next week, so I hope you all can attend one of them. Thank you.
Shaki, anything?
Hey, I just wanted to say thank you for having us as a participant in this, and all the best to all my comrades in WWP, and all the excellent work that you guys continue to do. And hey, just fight the powers. That's what I say. Let's build, let's organize. We need to rebuild the left in this country, and people need to go to work, in jobs, not just 501c3s, so that we can, begin to organize the working class people of this country, and, have position ourselves for the long term in terms of fighting back and building, revolutionary struggle. So thank you for having us.
And Roshan, I saw your comment in the.
I was just saying that I think my last comments that I made will be my closing remarks, if that's okay. Big thank you for everyone who came, and yeah, we have the recording if you all want to send this to your groups as well and share. Yeah.
And Askari, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say thank y'all for this opportunity. Thank y'all for tuning in. Also, if you're not part of an organization, join the organization. Real, take this knowledge, take everything you learn, go back to the streets, learn more. We all learn every day. You feel me? And also look at, the global South and the Black and brown world, the colonized world. Look at the movements going in Burkina Faso and Mali against French imperialism. Look at the Palestinian struggle. Look at the struggle of Africans and Black and brown people in the U.S. and Haiti as well. You feel me? Really build up that international lens, because we got to be, the workers of the world will unite. Eventually we're gonna be free one day. You just gotta keep on going for real. That's it. That's all I got for y'all. Oh, my fault. I want to plug in the Instagram for the organization I made, Mapinduzi. So on Instagram is Mapinduzi_252. I'll drop it in the chat too. Y'all follow us for real.
Great, and thank you so much for all the speakers for being here. This was such a great discussion. I'm going to echo Roshan. I wish I could listen to y'all for so much longer. Yeah, I think just for final thoughts, just to kind of keep this going, I think part of the purpose of calling this forum was to see if we can keep this going, have more discussions, have more, not just talk, have actions in the streets if we can, and to sort of go along with that to sort of see, start an anti-imperialist coalition again, anti-war, anti-imperialist coalition here in the Triangle in North Carolina. So keep an eye out for that. In the next few weeks, I think we'll be having more information about how to plug into that. And if you're interested, please reach out, and Durham at workers.org. And yeah, I think.
Hey, Paul, one last quick thing. BWFJ Women's Commission is having a program this Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m. We're going to be looking at the life of the movie Fundy. And I think everybody, if you haven't seen the flyer, please contact us at the BWFJ. We want to get that around. But feel free to join us. We got a virtual as well as an in-person program going on at the Fruto Labor Center in Raleigh. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think that's it for tonight. So thanks everyone for being here. And yeah, we'll see you all out there.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Compromise, no retreat. Y'all do.